Okay, good. So we talked about this before. In my opinion, this section is easier, and really the last part of this chapter from here on out is easier than what we've done heretofore in this chapter. Okay? This particular section, we are just talking about the 4 kinds of sentences. Okay? The first one is the kind that you learn how to write. If you're here, or even if you're not here, you're fortunate to have a good teacher that pushes you. You learn how to write a few of these short ones in kindergarten. Okay? It's a simple sentence. It's one independent clause, one complete idea, no dependent. Okay? Now you may have multiple subjects and multiple verbs, right? I'm going to get rid of this chalk because it's getting my nerves. Fingernails are getting in the way with that short chalk. Okay. So you could have something like, okay, and you could have a compound subject and a compound predicate, but this is still one complete idea and no dependent clauses, right? Okay, that's a simple sentence. Now you could just have one subject and one verb, but I just want to show you that to make that clear that you can have both, a compound subject and a compound verb, or just one compound subject and simple verb but not a compound, or vice versa, okay? But it's one complete idea and no dependent clauses, okay? The next one that you, if you had grammar, I'll just leave it at that, in elementary school, that you learned about, probably didn't hit this till probably maybe 4th grade or so, as far as having to label it as such, is a compound sentence, okay? The compound sentence is 2 complete ideas, 2 independent clauses, at least 2. It's usually just 2. If you try to do 3, it usually ends up being stringy and not sounding very good, okay? But still, no dependent clauses, okay? In these sentences, remember, you're going to either have one of these probably, or you're going to have a comma and then one of those coordinating conjunctions. And, but, or, nor, or, yet, or so. Okay? It is possible, and I'm not sure if they have one in this book, they may, that you would have 2 complete ideas joined with this. Okay? One way that you know that it is indeed that is often if you have a sentence and then the next sentence is an absolute explanation of the first sentence, this letter after your colon will be capitalized. Okay? Doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. But generally we're looking at one of these 2. And if we see one of these 2, then we'll probably have at least a compound sentence, perhaps compound complex, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Okay? Then the third type, and this is the most common in what I would call mature writing. Okay? If you're a high school writer and you're writing a paper and you go through, and if you were to go through, nobody's going to do this for fun. And I get that, okay? But if you were to go through and label what kind of sentences you were writing in a paper, more of them than the other 3 should be this. Okay? These make for better reading, they make for better writing. Okay? This is one independent clause, or one sentence, one main idea, complete thought, and at least one dependent clause. You could have more. It's entirely possible you have a couple dependent clauses in a complex sentence, but you're going to have at least one. Okay, let me go back and do one for this. Let's do an example. See, I don't like those two ideas together. It's gonna stick. Let's say this. Tanner and Ethan currently sit alone, semicolon, meaning all of everybody else, okay? I will greatly miss Ethan, but will welcome Jacob back. But I still need something here. Let's try after our semicolon, let's try something like this. Because we're kind of changing the idea there a little bit. But you got two complete ideas there. All right, no dependent clauses, right? Good, okay. One independent clause and at least one dependent clause. Because I finished my work early, I was able to enjoy my weekend. Okay, so here's your dependent clause, adverbial, your independent clause. Okay, final one here, and these usually on the paper take up more real estate, if you will. Okay, this type of sentence usually takes up more space. There are more words to it on a given page. Doesn't have to be long, but usually they look longer, and they are longer. Okay, this is two independent, and could it be more than two? Yeah, but again, we don't want to get stringy. Independent clauses. And then again, at least one dependent. Okay, I'm going to erase this so I have the two with the colon, so I have a little bit of room there. Okay. And I apologize to you guys at home. This is kind of all over the board, but I at least think you can see it and make it out if you want to. All right, so let's do this. I didn't mean for the sentence to be this long, but again, they do tend to be longer, okay, because you've got two complete ideas. Kirsten and Hannah are good friends, semicolon, okay? They spend a lot of time together. That's another independent clause, so that's your two independent clauses. That makes the compound part. And then a fact, and then here's your dependent clause, which describes fact, okay? And this whole thing together actually acts I started to say it acts as a positive, but there's not a noun here that it renames. In fact, I had to stick the words a fact in there so that this wasn't technically wrong. Because if I had just put which strengthens their bond, I have a pronoun relating back to no noun. Right? It's a verb idea, it's not a noun. So, but that's your dependent clause, okay, describing fact. That's a compound, complex sentence. Y'all have questions? Yes?
Do they have to be independent, dependent?
No, absolutely not. Good question. You absolutely, and let's see if they give you an example here. They don't. They put one, well, they do mix it up a bit. If you look right above in summary here, you have a dependent clause after we take pictures, adverbial. We can go sledding, and then we can go, okay, so if this is your independent, two of them together, and then we can go inside and drink hot chocolate if you like it. So you've got two adverbial, one tucked at the beginning, one tucked at the end. But in actuality, you absolutely can have, and I'm trying to see if they give us an example on this next page, you absolutely can have a dependent clause sandwiched right in between the independents. Now, when I say in between, it's gonna have to be either at the end of the first independent or it's gonna have to be at the beginning of the second. You see what I'm saying? But it can be in the middle. It doesn't have to be at the beginning or the end. Here's one. No, it's not. Hold on. See if I can find one. Jury condemned him to death, however. Okay, here, yes. This will be our sample sentence that we do together. Look at number 10 on 510, and yes, I know that's still going, but this will help them. And then I'll turn it off. Number 10 on 510, and no, you don't just get to do one exercise with this, because this you need to practice on. I've got another one I got to make a copy of to do 10 more, okay? Because I don't think 10 is enough to practice this. Finding Socrates guilty. Okay, that's participial. That's not any kind of clause. It's just a participial phrase. The jury condemned him to death. That's your first independent clause, semicolon. However, comma, here's a dependent clause. Because, no, that's prepositional. Dog. Okay, because I had it, because of a religious holiday, Socrates spent 30 days in prison awaiting his execution. Okay, here's what I did with this one. And you guys see if you understand why I say this is what it is, okay? The book has this one as just plain old compound. But when we talked about adverbial clauses, and we did this on LMS, I'm aware of that, okay? If you watched the video in particular, I went over, and they talk about it on page 121, what they call an elliptical adverb clause. Now, if you'll remember, with the adjective clauses, often the word that is left out. It's elliptical. Okay, it makes it harder to find, but it makes sense without it. With an adverb clause, it's not your subordinating conjunction. It's not your intro word that's left out. It's your subject or your verb or both. Okay? And so if you look closely at this sentence, they're saying it's compound. And I would have accepted compound. But this is what I see when I read this. Finding Socrates guilty, the jury condemned him to death, semicolon. Okay, you got your first independent clause. However, because of a religious holiday, that's just prepositional, Socrates spent 30 days in prison awaiting his execution and imparting some of his most fruitful ideas. What I read when I see that in my head is he spent 30 days in prison while he was awaiting. But again, the while is left out. So I guess technically that has to be compound. I'm going to find you one, Ethan, because I've seen several in my time in the middle. I'm going to find you one. But usually, more often than not, to be fair, they're at the beginning or the end. But they can be in the middle. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
On one of the example sentences for
Mhm.
the compound complex,
Mm-hmm.
it's if you want to come to bring your camera and be sure to dress warmly.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't put a comma before the conjunction.
I know. If you remember when we do, when we have done punctuation chapter, which is always at the end, but we usually move it up to March when we do it in the spring because that's before achievement testing, and they have a lot of that on achievement testing. If you remember, there in the comma section, they talk about where to put commas, blah, 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 and they say before the coordinating conjunction between the two independent clauses. But then they have this little, unless they're short and closely related. And Ms. Shoemate's argument has always been, what is short, because you don't define it, and who determines closely related, right? So technically, according to their rule, they're not wrong here, because they're both short and they are closely related. But absolutely, I would put a comma before that and. In fact, I have it in my book.
I was wondering if it had something to do with the fact that they're both imperative.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. I mean, if you had longer imperative statements, they would have a comma. So it shouldn't. I mean, to be fair, by identity, sometimes your imperative statements, because they are commands or requests, are going to be shorter anyway, but just their being imperative should not. Absolutely not. Okay, good question. Any others? All right, bye fellas. See you next week, Jacob. Yay!